If you're looking at the title of this video and you're thinking, that's pretty redundant, Vanessa, then this video is probably not for you. But if you came to this video and you thought that the question in the title is a valid question, then this video is made just for you. So hi, by the way, my name is Vanessa. You're probably new to the channel because if you aren't, you probably would think the question is redundant. But anyways, we're going to be answering the question in the title today. We're going to be looking at some history. We're going to be looking at some scripture to answer this question because this is a deciding factor for a lot of people. A lot of people wonder, is the church that they are in the church that Christ established? And I know myself, I'm a cradle Catholic, but if I were a convert to the faith, I would want to know which church is the true church, and the true church that is, I would want to join that church. So today we're going to be looking at some scripture, but we're going to be looking at a lot of history. We're also going to be specifically looking at Acts 11 verse 26, which is a verse that's brought up a lot by Protestant Christians to prove that the first church wasn't the Catholic Church. So we're going to get into that today. So if you're looking forward to hearing this, please give this video a like. And after this video, if you hated it, be sure to give it a dislike and let me know why in the comment bar down below. Also hit that subscribe button so you know when I post and you know when I go live if you're interested in seeing more of me. But without further ado, let us get into the video. So the first thing I like to do is to define my terms. So right now we're going to define the term Catholic, Christian, and church. This will help us out later on in the video. So let us first define the word Catholic. So what does Catholic mean? Well, the term Catholic comes from two Greek words. The first one being kata, which means in respect of, and the other one being holos, which means whole. By the way, I don't know how to pronounce any words in Greek, so if I'm butchering any words in this video, be sure to let me know which ones I am and how to properly pronounce them down below. So those two terms come together and they make up the word katholokos, which means universal. So the word Catholic means universal. So what does Christian mean? Well, we see the word Christian in scripture. We learn that it's the Greek word Christanos, which once again, I'm probably saying entirely wrong, which means a follower of Christ. And what does the word church mean? Well, the word church comes from the Greek word ekklesia, which means call out of. And the word church is commonly defined to as an assembly or a convocation. So when we hear Christian church, we learn that it's a follower of Christ's assembly. And when we hear Catholic church, we understand that it's a universal assembly. So in scripture, we see the word Christian. We see that in Acts 11:26. And we also see the word church used many times in scripture. But the word Catholic is never found in scripture. A lot of times people use this as a reason to be put off by the Catholic Church because the term Catholic is not found in scripture. So how could it be the church that Christ established? Well, there are other terms that we use as Christians that are not found in scripture, yet we believe in them. For example, the Trinity. And if you want me to go more in depth on this topic, whether or not things have to be found explicitly in scripture, I'll have a video linked down below for you guys. So if the word Catholic doesn't come from scripture, where does it come from? Now, this is not getting into like the origin of the word Catholic and who was the first person to ever say it. What I'm going to get into right now is who is the first person to ever put Catholic and church together. And the first person to do this was Ignatius of Antioch. He did this in a letter that he wrote in AD 107. That's the oldest account that we can find it written down. That doesn't mean that the word Catholic had never been used before in the terms of Catholic Church. This is just the oldest account of us finding it being written down. And he wrote this in a letter. He said, "Wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church." So that's all fine and dandy, but who is Ignatius of Antioch and why are we reading from him? Well, Ignatius of Antioch was the third bishop of Antioch. That's if we include Peter as the first bishop of Antioch. If we don't include Peter as the first bishop of Antioch, then that makes Ignatius the second bishop of Antioch. But either way, he was a bishop in Antioch in the early church. And they say Ignatius was ordained by St. Paul. So this is in the really early parts of the church that Ignatius was a key figure. So while Ignatius of Antioch was bishop of Antioch, there was a persecution that happened. And while he was bishop, he ended up being taken to Rome to be martyred. And on his way to Rome, he spent a lot of time writing letters to the various churches around. And that is where we get the letter that we read from earlier. Common theme in his letters was this call for unity of the Christian people. We read about this call for unity a lot of times in scripture. Once again, I did a whole video on it. Check the description for that. But we see see this call to be unified, and Ignatius saw this as being very, very important. So he talked about it in his letters. So this makes sense as to why Ignatius referred to the church that Christ instituted as the Catholic Church. Catholic meaning universal, because he called for this universality of the church, this unity within the church, as we're taught many times in Scripture. So we see this important for the church to remain universal, united, throughout the years from the time of Christ to the time now. And the only church that we can trace back to the 2,000 years that the church has been around is the Catholic Church. However, even though we can look at this through history, you can get history books and you can trace back the Catholic Church and the succession of all of its bishops, all of its popes, all of its priests, all the way back to the apostles, to Christ, to Peter, people still don't understand that the Catholic Church is the church that Christ established. And one of the main reasons is a verse that comes out in Scripture, which is Acts 11:26. So in Acts 11:26, the followers of Christ are called Christian. Let us read the verse right now. By the way, this part of the Bible, it's called the Church of Antioch. It ranges from Acts 11:19 through 26, and I have it on the screen right now. But we're going to be focusing on the last part of this section, which is Acts 11:26, where we see the followers of Christ being called Christians. It says, "And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the church and taught a large number of people. And it was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians." So this verse explains to us that this is the first time the disciples were called Christians, which means followers of Christ. So does this verse where the disciples of Christ are called Christians indicate that the first Christians were Christian? Yes, it's kind of redundant. We read it in Scripture. The first Christians, the first followers of Christ, were Christians as defined in Acts 11:26. But does this verse contradict the teaching that the Catholic Church is the first church that Christ instituted? It does not. Why? Because Catholics are Christians. Catholics are followers of Christ. An interesting thing about this is that in this verse, the first place where Christians are called Christians is in Antioch. And the first time that Christians are considered to be a part of the Catholic Church is in Antioch by the third bishop of Antioch, which was Ignatius. Now, we understand why Ignatius called the church Catholic, because he was calling for it to be universal. But Ignatius adding the term Catholic to the word church does not take away from the meaning of what the church is. He simply added the word Catholic to the name church to greater define its need for unity and for it to be universal, as Scripture calls for us. The church that Ignatius calls Catholic in 107 AD is the same church that Christ established in Matthew 16:18, and it's the same church that's still referred to as Catholic today. A lot of people say that because the name Catholic was adhered on, that it's something different. And this always reminds me of Romeo and Juliet, one of my favorite things I read in school. Romeo says something that's really stuck with me for a long time, so I'm going to read what he said. He said, "What's in a name, that which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet." Here he explains that just because something is named differently or greater defined does not take away from what it is or what it has been. There's a perfect example of this in Scripture where we see something get a new name but does not change what it ever has been. And this comes from the book of Acts, chapter 11, verse 26. Which sounds a little bit familiar, but let's just read the verse. Maybe we've read it before in a different video. Let's read it. "And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch for a whole year. They met with the church and taught a large number of people. And it was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians." I think we did read this verse. I'm not sure if we read it in this video or if we read it in a different video, but I know we've read it before. Acts 11:26. Why does that sound familiar? The disciples of Christ were disciples of Christ even before they were named Christian. Just because they received the name Christian does not mean something right there changed. So does the fact that Scripture refers to the first Christians as Christian contradict from the fact that the first church was the Catholic Church? No, it does not. Why? Because the word Catholic was adhered to the word church in AD 107 by the third bishop of Antioch, which was Ignatius of Antioch. The word Catholic means universal. He was calling for the church to remain universal and united. This united church that we talk about many times in scripture that Ignatius of Antioch was talking about is the Catholic Church. And we can know this through history. We can know this through my videos, which I'll have linked down below. We know this through scripture. But a way that we can know about this is that the only church that we can trace back to Ignatius of Antioch is the Catholic Church. And you know who we could trace Ignatius of Antioch to? To Peter. And we could trace Peter back to Christ. So many claim that the word Catholic was never meant to be adhered to the word church. If it was or if it wasn't, the name Catholic stuck. We see this in early church writings by other early church Christians. And we can see that it stuck because it's been the word for 2,000 years. But even if you argue that the word Catholic was never supposed to be adhered to the word church, we must understand that it adhered for good reason. The church is supposed to be universal. It's supposed to be united as we are taught in scripture. So let's just say that the word Catholic was never adhered to the word church. It never stuck. It does not take away from the church being the church that Christ established, that this church is being traced back 2,000 years. It doesn't change the church because universal was added to its name. Let us take us back to Romeo. He said, "What's in a name that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." I love that because I love roses. But anyways, the church that Christ established would endure till the end. The gates of Hades would not prevail against the church that Christ established. And the only church that we can trace back to Christ, to the apostles, to Peter the rock that Christ built his church upon, is the one true holy Catholic and apostolic church, the Catholic Church. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, please, like I said, give it a like. And if you didn't like it, give it a dislike. If this kind of got you interested in the Catholic Church, be sure to check out the description because I have great videos down below that talk more in depth in the scripture aspect about why the Catholic Church is the one true church. So check out the description. Also check out the channel. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of me. Also, if you absolutely hate everything I say, also hit the subscribe button because then you can argue with me in every single video. And I love having people here. I love diversity of thought. I love getting in discussions with you guys about this stuff in the comment bar or whether it's through the live stream. So stay in touch. I love seeing you guys and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye-bye.